Hey, this is Reification, somewhat new to 1v1 in general. That's probably means that he's played a bunch of 2v2 and stuff. 2v2 is a totally unrelated game. Like, you think getting really good at 2v2 will make you really good at 1v1, and you'd be wrong. Man, in 2v2, if you expand too much without, like, massively over-defending, you just lose. Whereas in 1v1, that's not true. Anyway, you watched the StarCraft Bronze to Masters series, which I haven't actually watched the whole thing because I'm already in Masters, but I watched the Silver episode that you said that you wanted me to see before I watched these games, and I would say everything he said in those videos is totally true, and that's a great foundation to build off of. So if you're following what he said, you're going to take a 330 expansion and go for a 2-1-1 build into a 5-1-1 build and do a 10-minute push with about 110 unit space worth of army. So let's see if that's what actually happens here. This is a TVP. The same build is going to be, you're going to do the same build for all three matchups, which I think is good. I think a 2-1-1 into a 5-1-1 is valid for all three matchups. And it really keeps things simple. It allows you to focus only on your production and only on hitting the benchmarks and only on your macro, because you're going to do the same thing in all three matchups. So I'm totally fine with that. You're cutting workers right now, so you're obviously not going to hit the benchmarks. I think one thing that he says, Filter says in the videos, which I totally agree with, is that if you do this build, you're not going to win unless you do it the right way. You need to have the right number of workers, the right number of buildings at the right times, and so on and so forth. So having a guideline to focus on is cool, but if you don't have the right number of workers, then fast expanding is going to hurt you, actually. So at 6 minutes, let's see, you should have 24 workers on one base, and this CC has been up for a little while. So no, 24 workers is what you should have. So you're only short one worker. I think this 3 racks, no factory, no gas, no add-ons, 1 bunker. I'm worried about this. Is this what he said to do? I didn't memorize his video or anything, so I'm just gonna give you the benefit of the doubt and say this must be what he said to do. But this is a very scary thing to do against Protoss, because this 4-gate that he did is pretty poorly executed. Look at this. He hits you with 6 units at 620, but he has $600 in the bank. Like, imagine if he'd actually spent all of that money. Like, he's gonna knock down the bunker with the tiny number of units he has, but if he had twice as many units, which he should, if you look at this bank, he should have twice as many units, you would just be dead right now. So I'm worried about that. I think having the bunker and 4 extra Marines is enough to hold off any 4-gate at this moment, but you have to have pre-pulled SCVs. You really need to see these units coming. You need to have a unit out front. But one of the rules that you're going by that is in his video is no scouting. So I don't know how you're supposed to survive a 4-gate with this build. But I think you are. I mean, looking at the game clock, you're going to survive this, but not so much. You shouldn't. At this point, you have 3 naked racks, a bunch of gas that you have no ability to spend, and no living bunkers. He should just kill you right now. There's no way you should live through this. Yes, and I don't think you are going to live through this. Look at how much money your opponent has, man. So I would take losses like this with a grain of salt and just say, you know what, if someone 4-gates really well, I will lose. Because if you want to use this build in all 4 matchups, you're going to lose to some stuff. Like, you're going to lose to a 6-minute Baneling Bust, you're going to lose to a 6-minute Roach Push, you're going to lose to a 6-minute 4-gate, you're going to lose to a Marine Tank push off of 1 base. There's a lot of things that can beat a super fast expand with only 1 bunker. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with you losing to those things, so yeah, you lost to this. I wouldn't feel too bad about it. I think you'd spent all your money. You had the 3 racks you're supposed to have. You got the double gas you're supposed to get. You had the bunker you're supposed to have, and you just lost because you didn't see his army coming until too late, and you didn't pull SCVs. So one thing that I'd like you to do is hotkey all of the workers at this base to like number 2, and then keep an eye out here. From 6 minutes till 8 minutes is when you have to be worried about dying. So from 6 minutes all the way to 8 minutes, just be staring at your front. And the second this first guy is visible, you want to hit 2 and right click on your bunker. And you should be able to get your guys there in time. So, come on, baby. Right now, okay? So obviously you have to be staring straight at this in order to be able to respond right now. This is the earliest you could ever possibly respond. But let's see if you had responded at this point, whether you would have had enough time. So right now is when your SCVs would have to have shown up, and they would have shown up in plenty of time to repair that bunker. So I would say, follow the dude's build because it's timed out pretty well, and if you lose to 4 gates, so be it. Lose to 4 gates. As long as you only lose 1 out of every 10 games, who cares? The goal of anyone who wants to improve and wants to be promoted should be to perfect his own mechanics and to win more than 50% of your games. You don't have to win all of them. So yeah. I never fast expand in TVP because of this. This is like, it's hard to survive a really early 4 gate. If you'd had the bunkers like here and here, if you'd had 2 bunkers here and here, then your worker pull would happen a lot quicker. And if you had vision over here of this ramp, then you'd get more time to react. And those are some minor improvements. I always love, if I'm going to have pure Marines with no add-ons and no factory against Protoss, you kind of have to have at least 2 bunkers, maybe 3. Because you don't have any Marauders to prevent him from just permanently kiting you with his not Medivacs, his Stalkers. So anyway, this was just a 4 gate. Like, yes, I agree with the sentiment of this replay that 4 gate is going to beat a single bunker and 3 extra Marines. There's nothing you could do to win that game with what you had. You just need to have more than what you had. 53 minutes of terrible. That's a funny game name. Game name. So let's see if you did what you were supposed to do properly, and then we'll talk about why you lost, whatever the reason turned out to be, or why you won, or whatever. I'm not going to watch all 53 minutes, though, dude. That's ridiculous. Games tend to be longer when both sides don't know how to win. So in the Silver League, if you macro perfectly, like Filter StarCraft, the video that you sent me says you're supposed to do, if you did what that video says, you're always going to win or lose by 10 minutes. There's never going to be a 53-minute game doing that build. So let's see. Because one of the rules, he sets us a bunch of rules, and one of the rules is don't get a third and stop workers at 52. So if you never get a third and you stop workers at 52, you're dead as soon as your main mine's out, which is at 15 minutes. So if any of your games ever last longer than 15 minutes, you weren't following the rules that Filter put forth. So this is weird. You're going Rax, Reactor, Tech Lab, Factory. I guess I really should be paying more attention to what he said the build was supposed to be to see whether or not you're doing it right, because all I remember was that he got Medivacs eventually. So 35 workers at 8 minutes is great. It looks like good things are happening. The one base benchmark is 30, so to have 35 at 8 means that you've had this natural up for quite a while. You're queuing up enough workers that you're not missing workers at your 2 command centers. That's good. Looks like, ooh, just barely. That's fine. And are you using the buildings you have? One of the things is that he said in his build was that the second your factory finishes, you start a reactor core on the factory and you start a starport with the same SCV that finishes that factory. And you're not doing that. I don't see the starport anywhere, so this is a problem. The build is timed out so that you're going to end up with and you're making the starport too far from the factory. You're supposed to swap it onto the reactor core. So as soon as this finishes, this reactor, this is also supposed to be finished, and you're supposed to have 200 gas and just get 2 medevacs and go with those 2 medevacs. It's like a 2 medevac timing push, so if you don't get the medevacs on time, it's not like working. No one mining gas over here. It's 10 minutes, you've got 48 workers. That's fine, but I think you're supposed to have 52. I think that's what he said. You have 4 guys on this geyser, you don't need 4 guys there. And I don't know why you'd get a third geyser if you're not going to put guys in it, so that seems like a mistake as well. And now you want to cut workers. You don't want more than 52. That's another one of the rules in his own build. Looks like you're getting contained, not contained, whatever this is called, elevated. He's going to elevator with low ground tank support. This is a pretty common, this is a pretty common engagement on this map. This is, your reaction to it is so dead wrong. Okay. So first, before your opponent attacks you at all, you're supposed to have 2 medevacs and be attacking right now. This is a 10-minute push. The whole point of the build is the 10-minute push. And you're supposed to have 110 unit space. So you did the build really well. I am happy with how you did the build. But you got stim. I would have gotten combat shields personally, because one of the rules of the build, again, is don't micro. Don't use stim, don't micro. So getting stim seems silly if you're not allowed to use it. So you would have already had the 2 medevacs if you'd done the build right, and you would have been attacking, and you would have caught him in midfield, and that would be great. If your army hits his army right now and just stims and A moves before the siege tanks siege up, I believe you win. I believe. One of the big problems here is that you have $1,100 in the bank. So even though your income is like more than double your opponent's income, he has a bigger army than you, because he didn't leave $1,000 in the bank. He spent it on his army. So that's bad. Is this bad? Is this bad? Is this bad? So all potential aside, all, I wish you'd intercepted him in the middle aside, he gets sieged up here, and then he's going to drop at the high ground. And what you want to know about when people do this is that these tanks can't get any further in, and they're going to have no marine support once he lifts these medevacs off and goes to the high ground. So what you want is to hold position dudes like marines, just out of range of the closest low ground tank. So cancel this, or wait till it's done and lift it. Cancel this and this. And then get a whole bunch of marines and just hold position them in an arc right along the edge of this white line. So you can click on the closest tank from your opponent. I believe you can even see it. Yeah, so you can see it because of this depot. You click on him and it brings up this white line, and the white line says he can shoot anything that's closer than this. And you just remember where that was, and you put some dudes here, put some dudes here, put some dudes here. And so now these tanks can no longer go forward. They can't get any closer to you. And so you're in no risk of losing anything except for units that you built in range of this edge, which should be very few, because you should expect this kind of attack. And that'll come from playing 100 TVTs on this map, and this will happen to you 10 times, and you'll just kind of expect it to happen. So then he's going to put his marines up on the high ground, and he's not going to be able to push any further forward, because you're going to have your own marines there just kind of stopping him. So the longer you stand there in that standstill, the further ahead you're getting, because your income is more than double his. Your income is like massively bigger than his. So yes, he'll knock down this depot and this depot, and yes, he'll force you to move these Raxes to somewhere else, but that's all he can do, and that's not really that scary. Another alternative is that you can put a group of marines here, like maybe 10, to be ready for when he elevators to the high ground, and rally all your buildings to right here so that your reinforcements continue to pile up right here. Then take everyone else you have, like this many troops, which is a lot, and walk over to here, right? And make a big line. What you want is a big arc. So like spread your dudes along this line, and then watch this depot or this Rax or whatever, and as soon as all of the tanks shoot a shot, it's going to go poof, and then you just stim and attack move right between these two tanks. Because once his marines are on the high ground, it's going to be tanks against marines, and without anyone to absorb damage for them, siege tanks are really fragile. They have 52 health per dollar, which is very, very low. And you'll just rip them to shreds, man. Just rip them to shreds. So the one thing you don't want to do, right? So you either want to go on this side of the tanks and hold position and do a delaying thing, or you want to go to this side of the tanks and attack into them. The one thing you don't want to do is attack into them from the high ground, into the tanking marines, and then bunch up in a little pile and attack into them like this. That's all pretty bad. And because your opponent is similarly making huge mistakes, you're actually going to mop this up. But you shouldn't have been able to. I mean, he should have just kept his Marines protecting the tanks. So now he's going to go drop in the middle of your mineral line. I wonder what his reinforcements are. He's got 3 buildings, right? This is the 111 tank push. It's a very standard TVT build. And you've got 3 racks and a factory and a starport. So your reinforcements should be massively overwhelming him. I like saying the H in overwhelming him. So most important, keep up producing units. This is good. And when you have 4 medevacs floating above a bunch of Marines, you got to focus fire on 1 Marine. Everyone has to be shooting that same Marine. Or you got to focus fire on medevac. Either way. But getting tanks in range of your base is kind of a killing blow in TVT. And the only way to prevent that from happening is to see it coming. Just like the 4-gate. In both of these cases, you didn't see the attack coming, so it's really hard to survive it. And, you know, Filter says don't scout and don't micro, so I guess don't see this coming. But you should be you should be way ahead of him at this point. You moved all your guys to the low ground, but move them back. Right now you got 34 workers in 2 bases against 23 workers on 1 base. You should be way ahead right now. And he's even floating his CC back up to the high ground. Your income is massively bigger than his. Your army production throughout the game has been 6,000 to his 4,600. You've just got a pretty huge lead. Once you actually... Oh, this is a Nick mistake, man. You saw that you needed to drop mules, so you dropped 3 of them. You're like, mule, mule, mule. But you had 8 mules saved up, so drop 8, don't drop 3. It should be mule, 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 mule. You know, do it 15 times. There's no reason to do it less than 100,000 million times, because if you do it too many times, there's no downside. There's no penalty. Penalized. This guy, yeah, there you go. I was going to say, he has no high ground vision. You can kill him anytime and go for it. So now we're all the way at 20 minutes into the game. You continue to be massively ahead, but you've never attacked him. You're just sitting here kind of defending, and you don't need to defend. You don't need to defend. Once you have these turrets, well, not these turrets, but just generally turrets. So you build a turret and it makes a little white circle around it, and then you make another turret so that his little white circle overlaps the other guy's circle, and so on and so forth, and you do a turret ring. That's what you did, and that's fine the way you did it. But you're not covering this. If he just right-clicks here and then shift-right-clicks here and then drops in your mineral lane, he's going to get there. So you want another turret right there. But once you have a turret ring in your main, you don't need to leave any troops in your main. You just consider your main immune. It's now immune to him. So you put all your guys on the low ground, and you should be able to just go kill him. Again, one of the rules of Filter StarCraft's build is no third. You're not allowed to build a third, and this is not my rule, this is his rule, and if you're trying to follow what he said to do, and I agree with his advice, this is a good way to win in Silver League. Don't make that third, baby. Win or lose off of 2 base. You have a bigger income than him right now, and you're gonna have a bigger income than him until your main runs out, and so you have 15 minutes to win the game. You know, after 15 minutes, if you didn't win, move on to the next game. You're practicing your ability to start off strong. You're not trying to practice your ability to transition into a late game and move your workers around and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think, yeah, again, I don't really want to watch a 53 minute game. But right after you survive this attack, what you want to do is wait until you've spent all your money after you've mopped this up. So here we go, you're mopping it up, 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 you're mopping it up. Come on, get rid of the stupid attack. Alright, now you're going to take a second to put your workers back up at your main. Reland your command center, get everything situated. Now, just queue up 2 rounds of production in all these buildings, rally them to the low ground, start your turret ring, and after about 3 rounds of production, when you get another siege tank and 2 more medevacs, you should go. So right now, your money's at 0. This is when you go. So take everything you have, and look, you have a bigger army than him, and just walk over to his base and plant it right here. You want to siege up so that your tanks are not in range of the high ground, but that they are in range of the bottom of his ramp, and now he can't go down his ramp. Then you just put some turrets like here and here and here and here and here and here and here, and now he can't get out of his base. He's stuck in his base. He's going to starve on one base, and you just auto win from there. So really, the point of this build is that if your macro is really good, it's a given that no Silver League player's macro is very good, because if he had great macro, he wouldn't be in the Silver League anymore. He would have moved on to the next league. So you can just assume that if you macro perfectly, you have a bigger army than your opponent. That's an assumption you can make, and it will be true 99% of the time in the Silver League, and just go for it. So take this army and move it to the front of your opponent's base. Don't be passive like this. I guess the reason you didn't go, you just tried to do it. You just tried to A move down to the low ground, and your tanks got stuck, and you're like, why are my tanks stuck? What's going on? So this Rax is in the way. There you go. Now your tanks finally get down. It takes you 20 minutes. This is like 8 minutes from when you should have attacked. Now you're at 200 unit space. You definitely should go. Definitely. Like, you should never just be sitting at 200 unit space. That's very silly. Come on. The longer you stay at 200 unit space, the less lead you're going to have, because he's going to get to 200 unit space too. And taking a 4th and a 5th and a 6th, these are things that you should do when you're a Diamond League player. I am with you on that. But right now, you're trying to do a 2-base build, and I don't know. And never stim so damn much. Look at all of your units are almost dead now. You stimmed 100 times. And you don't want to just be attack moving into him. In TVT, tanks are immune to Marines, basically. I mean, Marines actually beat tanks in small numbers, but if you have 7 or 8 tanks, it's no longer reasonable to attack into them with Marines, especially if your tanks are out of range of the low ground. Now the only way for your Marines to do any damage to him are to get up this ramp. So this engagement was terrible. You do want to attack, but you don't want to kill him with it. What you want to do is take your whole army, make it into a ball like it is now, and then attack, hug the left side of this ramp. And as soon as a single siege tank shoots at you, remember in your mind the location of where that first siege tank shot you, and move all your troops up to that range, but just a little bit less than that range, so that nobody's getting shot by the enemy siege tanks. Then spend a scan, see what he has. In this case, he's got a ton of tanks here, but no tanks here. You could have killed his natural. You could have just walked up and killed his natural. So, yeah, get an idea of what you're actually facing, and never walk into the tank fire. Like, he has... His only siege tank coverage is of the very left side of this ramp, except for this one tank. And you can always just ignore one tank. You can even ignore 2 tanks. You just never want to ignore 5 tanks. So, if you ignore this tank, you can just walk everybody up the left side of this and kill his command center. This is bad. You never want to be just attacking. Look at what you did. See, the problem is, in the video that you were taking guidance from, he said if you can get an extremely large army and then just attack move it into your opponent without microing, you will win if you do that at 10 minutes. And he's right. At 10 minutes, if you could have caught him with a larger army and just attacked into him, he only has 4 tanks. Like, at 10 minutes, the most tanks you can have, I think, is 6, and that's only if you go gas first. Like, you're never really gonna see more than 4 or 5 tanks at 10 minutes. But at 20 minutes, at 30 minutes, there's a very distinct possibility that there will be enough tanks that no amount of Marines will be able to overwhelm them just by attack moving into them. And that's the problem, man. So I've said it in the Marine drill, and Filter said it in his Silver League guidance video that you were mimicking. If you have a much bigger army and you A move it into your enemy, you'll win. But the problem is that's only true in the early game. That's only true for the first 10 minutes. When you're 55 minutes into the game, you can no longer just A move into siege tanks with Marines. It doesn't work. Yeah, dude. Yeah. So I guess if you wanted to know what you should have done when you had 200 unit space. First of all, you should have attacked long before you got 200 unit space. You should have attacked at 12 minutes. But second, the point of this build is that it's a 10-minute timing attack. It's meant to have 110 unit space and a $3,000 army at 10 minutes. And if you look at what you actually had at 10 minutes, it's 2,200 with no siege mode and no medevacs and no combat shields. Stim isn't even done yet. So at 10 minutes, you have a $2,200 army, and we all know that the 10-minute benchmark is 35. So your army is just way too small. You can't kill anyone with this. And if the whole focus of your build is to be a 2-base 10-minute timing attack, and you don't have a large army at 10 minutes, then you just didn't do the build right. So I liked your SCV production. You could have had more. You actually should have had 4 more. And I liked your the plan that you had, the 5-1-1. That's a good plan. And you made all the buildings in the right order. You threw down 2 more racks after you got your starport. You swapped the starport onto the reactor like you're supposed to. You just kind of did it all a little bit slowly, so that when your opponent actually ran into you, you have this $1,000 in the bank, and your army is small by $1,000. So yeah, I don't know. So the first piece of advice: try to do the build properly. The second piece of advice, once you know that you can't win with the 2-base timing attack and you do want to switch into a late game sort of thing, you're going to have to learn how to use tanks and marines to fight against tanks and marines, because when you have a tank line versus tank line battle, you can't just be running tanks. I mean, you can't run anything into pre-sieged tanks unless you have a really big spread, a really big arc. And to get a good idea of how this works, you're going to want to go into the Unit Tester Online map. This one. Oh, damn it. Okay, never mind. This is the right one. So Unit Tester Online 0.94. And just create various sized armies of the compositions that you're thinking about and throw them at each other, man. Throw them at each other. So in this game, it was a bunch of Marines and 4 tanks against, just say, like 12 tanks. This is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Let's make it so that the armies are roughly the same size, right? This needs to be... There. So now these armies are roughly the same size. Okay? Boom. Is there any way for the army on the left to beat the army on the right if they're just sieged up and you're attacking into them, right? I wish you could fast forward. Those armies were both the same size, but the blue army lost 1 siege tank, maybe no siege tanks. And this wasn't even the scenario, right? Because he was on the high ground. He was sieged up in such a way that the only way for your army to reach him was to go through a ramp. So your guys couldn't even spread out and walk towards him in a nice big spread out pile. They had to go through this little tiny ramp. And there's just no possible way to beat the big massive siege tanks on the high ground through a ramp. There's nothing you can do to make the red team win this battle. So in TVT, you get in situations like this a lot where it's completely impossible for red to beat blue. But if red has a bigger army than blue, red doesn't have to win the fight. All red has to do is to deny your third and starve you to death. A lot of TVTs end via starvation. So if the blue team has these siege tanks in this position, the red team wants to move to the edge of that white line. So you grab the closest guys and say, okay, this is where the white line is. I'm going to siege up at the edge of the white line. And I'm going to put my tanks behind the siege tanks. I mean, my marines behind the siege tanks. And just hold position and say, this is now my position. You can't move into me either. So both sides now have a no man's land where nobody can go. The blue can't move forward and red can't move forward. And if this is in the middle of the field, it doesn't really matter. It's stupid. The game's going to last forever. But if this no man's land is on blue's natural, like it would have been in that game, now blue only has 1 base and he can never get a second one. So that should be your goal in TVT. As long as both sides have a small number of tanks, like 4 or less, you can make a bigger army than him, you can attack into his army, and you can kill it. But once both sides have a whole bunch of tanks, you can no longer really move into each other. I wish red could scan. Especially if both sides have SCVs to repair after the big siege tank versus siege tank battle. Anyway, point is, don't walk into sieged tanks if there's more than 4 of them ever. And there are exceptions. Like, basically the problem wasn't so much that you can't walk into siege tanks, is that you can't walk in a small area against siege tanks. So like 4, 5, 6. So say you're doing Marauders versus siege tanks, like, I think that's like about the same. These Marauders can easily kill these siege tanks, but they can't kill the siege tanks without stim in a ball. If you attack Marauders into siege tanks, the siege tanks should beat the Marauders to death. Die, Marauders, die. But if you have stim, Darren stim, and you do the same thing, run. I don't know if this is going to work yet. I've never, but it'll certainly work a heck of a lot better, because stim reduces the amount of time I spend walking. So now there's only 3 tanks left, and now we do the same thing, but we're gonna split our dudes up, right? Da da da. Da 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 da. Oh, run in there, run in there, run in there. Yeah, Marauders win. So, it's kind of important to understand how infantry versus siege tank stuff works if you're going to be making infantry in TVT. But nobody really just makes pure siege tanks. It's usually a bunch of tanks and a bunch of Marines. And the Marines themselves will kick the Marauders' butts even if the tanks aren't sieged up, because Marines are freaking great against Marauders. So this is why nobody really masses Marauders in TVT, even though technically, yes, Marauders can beat siege tanks with a good spread on equal numbers as long as there's fewer than 6 siege tanks. But Marines are so crazy good against Marauders that it just tends not to be worth your while to mass Marauders. So what people do instead of massing Marauders is they make a bunch of Marauders and a bunch of Marines, like this. And then you've got... yeah, both sides are about the same. And then you siege these dudes up, and you move these dudes like this, and like this, and like this, and like this. So let's go. All right. So the Marauders kill the tanks while the Marines fight the Marines is the point. So it's still not going to really work. Marine tank is such a good composition that actually, this is why everyone goes Marine tank. There's nothing that beats Marine tank. Like, if you have fully upgraded Marines with relatively upgraded tanks and your opponent has pure Marauder, then he's going to lose because Marine tank beats Marauder. If he has pure Marine, he's going to lose because Marine tank beats Marine. If he has Marauder Medevac, you're going to lose because Marine tank beats Marine Marauder Medevac. The only way to fight Marine tank is with Marine tank. Or if you have too many tanks and not enough Marines, sometimes you can overwhelm them in the air with battle cruisers. Or if you have too many Marines and not enough tanks, sometimes you can overwhelm them just by having more tanks. Stuff like that. But generally, Marine tank is such a solid composition that it's not surprising that Filter told you to go Marine tank. Like, that's the strength of Marine tank. The Marines they absorb damage for the tanks who do huge splash damage, and it all works out. So, no, I just want to do this again because it's fun. Squish, 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 squish. Lost practically nothing. Marine tank is awesome. So, anyway, if your opponent gets more than 4 siege tanks, you can't attack into it under any circumstances. You just want to get siege tanks of your own. That's why usually what you want to do in the build that you're going for, it opens 3 racks and then it goes 3-1-1 to get medevacs, right? You get 2 medevacs really quickly and then 4 medevacs really quickly, and then you can attack with those 4 medevacs. You can do drops on the high ground, you can do attacks at the natural while you drop on the high ground, you can attack at the natural, then retreat because you have stim and you're faster than anything a Terran has that can chase you down, and then do a drop on the main afterwards, or all sorts of cool things like that. Marine, Marauder, or even just Marine Medevac. Very good composition in the early game of TVT. But in the early game of TVT, your opponent can't have very many tanks. Once he has a bunch of tanks, if he wants to have 3 bases, he needs to spread those tanks out into 3 different locations, and so you get even longer in the game where you get to try to overwhelm him with your infantry versus his tanks. Because if he has, like you saw in the game that we just watched, he had a bunch of tanks, but they were all covering his main. If you'd gone to his natural or gone to his third, you could have killed his natural or his third, because all of his tanks were in one place. So in order to prevent you from just shutting down his natural, he has to have some tanks at his natural, but then you could just drop his mains. He has to have some tanks at his main. So now instead of 8 tanks, he has 3 tanks in one place, 3 tanks in one place, and 2 tanks at another, and you can easily beat 2 tanks with infantry. That's no problem. You can easily beat 3 tanks with infantry like that. So that's how all that works. But yeah, once he has enough tanks so that he can put a bunch of them in a place and say to you, if you want to go past this place, you need to kill these 6 tanks. Well, the answer can't be, okay, I'll kill those 6 tanks with my infantry, because infantry can't kill 6 tanks as long as they're protected by Marines. So the answer has to be, I will use my own tanks. I will use my own tanks. So you click on where his siege line protects him to, and you siege up your own tanks. Just at max range of that, and I totally screwed it up. But now all his Marines get eaten by your tanks while you're not taking any damage from his tanks. And then we saw how easy it is before to kill tanks when they don't have the Marines to soak up the damage for them. Let's see if I can do this. So yeah, that's the general idea. In order to fight a big hunk of tank Marine, you need tanks of your own. Because if you don't have tanks of your own, he can just keep slowly churning forward, moving his siege tank line in until he eventually shuts down your natural, like you should have shut down his in that game. So yeah, your goal is always to get tanks, but I would recommend, if you ever have to take your third, then go from 1 factory to 3 factory and just pump out a bunch of tanks. And when you have, like, in that attack, you had like 7 or 8 tanks and a crap ton of Marines. You never want to stim the Marines until they've already taken a tiny bit of damage. So in this fight, you want to stim the Marines right now. You don't want to stim them before that, because you saw in that fight you ended up stimming your Marines 3 times, and that's just crazy. If you stim your Marines 3 times, it's 10% of their health each time. That's like 30% of their health that's going away for no reason. Yeah. So in that game, you should have just shut down his natural instead of trying to attack into his main. Let him have his main. He can keep his main. You don't care. What you want to do is make it so that he can't mine any more money, and mine a bunch of money of your own, and then get battle cruisers with 3/3 upgrades, and just be like, okay, you can try to leave your base, but I have battle cruisers with 3/3 upgrades. How's it going? So yeah, that's what should have happened there.